The rain came first, the way it always did in Seattle. Not in warning, not in sheets, but in that patient, hovering mist that settled on everything without asking permission. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass of the 34th floor conference room, the city below looked soft and indistinct, its edges dissolved by November. Inside, the light was controlled and amber, the table long and dark, the chairs filled with people who believed the morning would go exactly as planned. Catherine Harrington stood at the head of the room with the particular stillness of someone accustomed to being the most important person present. 51 years old, white, composed in the way that only comes from decades of never having to explain yourself. The presentation behind her showed acquisition projections for Capitol Hill. 12 people in the room. 12 sets of eyes on the numbers. The door opened, and the man who entered wore the pale blue uniform of a building maintenance worker. He carried a mop bucket. He looked to be in his late 30s, black, unhurried in the way of someone who had made a decision and was no longer questioning it. "Sorry, I thought this room was empty." Catherine didn't look up from her notes. "Close it from the outside." The man set the bucket down. The sound it made on the hardwood was quiet, deliberate. He straightened. "Ms. Harrington, my name is Marcus Cole, federal judge, Western District of Washington. I think you should know. This room has been under active audio recording pursuant to a Department of Justice order since 6 o'clock this morning." 12 people stopped breathing at exactly the same moment. Catherine Harrington looked up. For the first time in the meeting, she looked directly at him. 9 months earlier, Marcus Cole left his apartment at 7 in the morning with $62 in his checking account and a mental list of what that money had to cover until Friday. The rent was $800, already paid, which was why the $62 existed instead of something more forgiving. He did not think about the $62 with self-pity. He thought about it the way a pilot thinks about fuel, as a constraint to navigate, not a condition to mourn. Maya was at the kitchen table eating toast and explaining, to no one in particular, that her science fair project on water pressure would definitively win because her hypothesis had already been proven twice, and the third test was just documentation. She was 8 years old, gap-toothed, and delivered this assessment with the confidence of someone who had never once confused certainty with arrogance. Her braids were slightly uneven. They were always slightly uneven. Marcus had learned from a library video 18 months ago, after Lisa died. When he had stood in the bathroom on a Saturday morning holding a brush and Maya's patient, upturned face in the mirror and understood with absolute clarity that he had no choice but to learn. He was better now. Maya had stopped wincing 6 months ago, which he counted as a professional milestone. Lisa had been gone 34 months, black ice on the Aurora Bridge. The other driver walked away. A young officer had come to the door with his hat in his hands. I and Marcus had noticed the hat, the specific way the man held it against his chest. And that detail had lodged itself somewhere permanent, while everything else from the weeks that followed had gone soft and unreachable. His therapist called it a protective response. Marcus called it the thing that happened, and he tried not to assign it weight beyond what it already carried. "Ba, are you listening? Water pressure, third test, documentation." He handed her the lunch bag. "Mom, you'll win. You say that every day. Because every day I'm right." She made a face that meant she agreed but wasn't going to say so. He watched her finish her toast and felt the particular sharpness of loving something that could be lost, And then he put that feeling where he put all feelings that didn't serve the morning, somewhere useful for later. Marcus had been a federal judge for 6 years. For the past 9 months, he had been something else as well, an investigator operating under a special appointment from the DOJ, embedded in the Harrington Property Group building under a maintenance contract, wearing a name badge that read Marcus C., and carrying a case number that did not yet exist in any public record. 73 complaints had been filed against Harrington and its affiliates over 6 years. 73 families who had been told, in the careful language of people who understood exactly what they were doing, that their applications did not meet current requirements, that certain units were no longer available, that perhaps other neighborhoods might be a better fit. The complaints had gone to HR. HR had filed them. No one had looked at them together until Marcus did. He rode the bus to the Harrington building with his maintenance badge clipped to his chest and thought about the shape of a system, how it never looked like a system from the inside, only from above, only when you had enough distance to see that the pattern was the policy. The lobby of Harrington Property Group occupied the 12th floor of a glass tower on 2nd Avenue. It smelled of fresh flowers and money managed carefully enough to look effortless. Marcus was mopping the corridor near the elevator bank at 11:15 when a man stepped off the elevator carrying a manila folder and the particular posture of someone who had prepared carefully for this appointment. James Whitfield was 54 years old, wore a charcoal suit that fit well, and had confirmed his showing 3 days prior. He had been waiting 40 minutes. The receptionist, badge-reading Tiffany, voice calibrated to warmth, leaned slightly forward across the desk. The thing is, that corridor isn't really... It may not align with what you're looking for. There are some really wonderful options on the south side of the city. South side. The phrase landed with the precision of something practiced. Not a slur. Never a slur. Something better insulated than that. Whitfield was quiet for a moment. His voice, when it came, was level. I'm a professor of economics at UW. My annual income is $180,000. I meet every listed qualification. We take a really comprehensive approach to applicant review. Marcus did not stop mopping. He tracked the angle of Tiffany's eyes, the half-second glance toward the inner office before she answered, the slight shift of her posture as she waited for a signal she'd already received. Someone was behind this. The receptionist was the surface. The architecture ran deeper. Whitfield left, shoulders straight, chin level, on the folder still in his hand. But Marcus watched his grip on it, knuckles tight, the only visible evidence of what it cost a man to walk out of a room with his dignity intact after someone had tried to price it. Rosa Mendez had been sitting in the lobby chairs for 40 minutes with a rental inquiry form she had no intention of submitting. She was a civil rights investigator with 31 documented cases and a theory that the number was much higher. And when Whitfield passed her on the way to the elevator, she didn't look at him. She looked at Marcus. 1 second. No words. In the parking garage at noon, she found him near the maintenance cart. You're not a janitor. He didn't look up. I don't know what you're talking about. You counted Tiffany's eye movements. You tracked the distance between her and the inner office before she answered. Nobody does that unless they're building a timeline. He looked at her then. Measured. How many cases do you have? 31 documented. I think it's more. 73, he said. 6 years, and Harrington isn't the only address on the list. That evening, after Maya was asleep, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with 73 folders arranged by date and a map of Seattle pinned to the wall behind him. Red markers, Beacon Hill, Rainier Valley. In the Central District, every high-density Black and Latino neighborhood in the city clustered with rejections, while comparable applicants from other zip codes moved through the same system without friction. He had a DOJ subpoena for internal Harrington communications. The email that mattered most was dated March 2018, signed C. Harrington, and contained 4 words embedded in a paragraph about leasing strategy. Prioritize profile alignment corridors. 6 years. An estimated $32 million in rental revenue generated by units systematically withheld. 73 families with documented complaints and nowhere to send them. His phone buzzed. Maya, from her bedroom. "Ba, are you doing something important?" "Yes." "More important than sleeping?" He looked at the map, at the red markers, at the name on the 2018 email. He put the phone down without answering and sat with the question a moment longer than it deserved. And because some questions don't have clean answers and pretending they do is its own kind of dishonesty. He turned off the desk lamp. What he didn't know, what he had no way of knowing as he walked down the dark hallway toward his daughter's room, was that 12 hours earlier, a camera in the parking garage had recorded 9 seconds of his face in conversation with Rosa Mendez. The footage had been flagged, reviewed, escalated. By morning, someone with considerable resources would be asking a single question. Who is he really? Maya came home from school on a Wednesday with her backpack straps held too tight and her eyes doing the thing they did when she was processing something she hadn't yet decided how to feel about. She set her bag down by the door instead of dropping it in the hallway the way she usually did, which told Marcus everything before she said a word. He was at the counter slicing an apple. He waited. She sat at the table and looked at her hands. Tyler said our neighborhood is a bad neighborhood. A pause, measured and careful. He said he didn't understand why we didn't move somewhere more appropriate. Marcus set the knife down. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat, not across the counter, not from a standing distance, but level with her, close enough that she didn't have to project. "What did you feel when he said that?" "Angry." She said it cleanly, without apology. But I didn't know what to say back, so I didn't say anything, and that made me more angry. You don't always need the words in the moment. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not hand someone a reaction they were hoping for. She considered this with the seriousness of a small judge weighing testimony. Then, "Ba, the map with the red dots. That's about people not being allowed to live where they want, isn't it?" It wasn't a question. He looked at her for a moment. This person who was 8 years old and had already learned to read the room, to read him, to connect evidence to conclusion without being told. "Yes," he said. "That's what it's about." "Then you have to win." She said it simply, the way she said the sky was gray or water pressure followed predictable laws. As a statement of observable fact. She got up, took 3 apple slices from the plate he'd prepared, and disappeared toward her room to start her homework. On the counter near the stove, a piece of toast sat half-finished from that morning where she'd left it, proof of the small self-sufficiencies she'd built in the quiet spaces of their life together. Marcus noticed it. He left it where it was. That same afternoon, 41 floors above street level, Catherine Harrington sat across from her head of security and looked at a photograph that had been printed on standard office paper. Marcus, the parking garage, Rosa Mendez beside him, but 9 seconds of footage, but 9 seconds was enough. If he's a federal judge, why is he wearing a maintenance uniform? She asked it without alarm, which was more unsettling than alarm would have been. It was the tone of someone who had navigated legal exposure before and understood that panic was a liability. Her security director didn't have an answer. She hadn't expected one. She turned to her general counsel, a careful man named Briggs, who had been with Harrington Property Group for 11 years and had earned his salary by being the person who knew which questions not to ask aloud. Pull everything HR logged from the Mendez inquiry last year. I want to know what was signed, what was said, and whether anyone in that department decided to be helpful in ways they weren't authorized to be. After both men left, Catherine sat alone in her office. The city stretched out below her in the November mist, outpatient and gray. She opened the bottom drawer of her desk and removed a folder with a yellow cover, its edges soft from handling. Inside were documents from 1994. Her father's signature at the bottom of an acquisition memo that described certain Seattle neighborhoods using language that would not survive a single hour of sunlight in a federal courtroom. She had read this document for the first time at 29, the year she joined the company. She had filed it away. She had not destroyed it. She had never been entirely sure what that said about her. She closed the drawer. She had built something real in 20 years. Revenue, reputation, 300 employees. None of that was nothing. But the foundation had been poured by someone else, and she had chosen, year after year, not to look too carefully at what was underneath. The first week of evidence gathering moved in the compressed, relentless rhythm of people who understood that time was not neutral. Irosa worked from a rented office in the International District, her wall covered in color-coded timelines. Marcus worked from the kitchen table after Maya was asleep, cross-referencing DOJ subpoena documents with Rosa's field notes. Dorothy Chen was 71 years old, retired, and had kept every piece of paper Harrington Property Group had ever sent her in a shoebox under her bed. 7 years. She pulled the box out when Rosa knocked on her apartment door in Rainier Valley and set it on the kitchen table without being asked. 14 emails, 3 letters, 1 internal routing slip that had been accidentally included in a correspondence packet, a single line in a different font from the rest. Flag, corridor priority conflict, reroute per alignment protocol. The routing slip was dated 6 days before Dorothy's application was denied. So Rosa photographed everything and drove back to the office at 11 at night with her hands steady on the wheel and something cold and clarifying moving through her chest. Thomas Okafor had worked in HR at Harrington for 4 years before he quit. He met Marcus at a coffee shop in the University District on a Tuesday morning, chose a table in the back, and ordered nothing. He was 38, methodical, a document from 2018 through 2023. The document from 2018 through 2023. The algorithm documentation, the scoring rubrics, the training materials for leasing agents. His voice was even, careful. I signed an NDA when I left, but an NDA doesn't cover federal civil rights violations, and we both know that. Marcus looked at the drive. He looked at Thomas. Why now? Thomas was quiet for a moment. Because I have a daughter who's going to start looking for apartments in about 10 years. And I would like the world she's looking in to be different from the one Dorothy Chen was looking in. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked out of the coffee shop into the gray Seattle morning without looking back. The USB contained what Marcus had suspected but needed confirmed. The algorithm wasn't accidental bias. It wasn't the accumulated effect of individual prejudice, wasn't the kind of thing a company could attribute to a few bad actors and a failure of oversight. It was engineered. Profile alignment scoring assigned weighted values to zip codes, surnames, and, in a modification introduced in 2020 after fair housing scrutiny increased nationally, voice pattern assessments conducted during phone inquiries. The system had been adjusted 4 times between 2018 and 2024, each adjustment calibrated to reduce statistical detectability while maintaining discriminatory outcomes. Someone had put serious technical thought into making injustice look like process. Rosa was on the phone with the DOJ Civil Rights Division in Washington, D.C. on a Thursday afternoon when Marcus walked into her office. She held up one finger. He waited. 73 documented cases, all with evidence sufficient for 42 U.S.C. Section 1983 and Fair Housing Act claims. We need 3 weeks to prepare the full federal filing. A pause. She looked at Marcus. Something shifted in her expression. We'll discuss timeline. Yes. She ended the call. They want to move faster, she said. Then we move faster. The evidence package Marcus prepared over the following days was not the work of a maintenance worker or even a careful lawyer. He laid a geospatial analysis across Rosa's conference table, layered mapping that overlaid property values, demographic density, application rejection dates, and algorithm modification timelines across 6 Seattle zip codes, and, in a second layer he had not shown anyone yet, across comparable data from Oregon, California, and Nevada. The pattern did not change across state lines. The algorithm traveled with the company. They didn't localize this, he said, and Rosa looked at the map for a long time without speaking. It's the same system in 14 affiliate companies across 4 states. Same scoring rubric, he hoping the number would shrink. Between 5 and 10 families total? He had run the estimate 3 times, hoping the number would shrink. Between 340 and 410. Across 8 years. The silence that followed was not empty. It had weight and texture, the specific gravity of a number that stopped being abstract and became people. Children who had shared bedrooms because their families couldn't secure the space they qualified for. Commutes that added hours to working days because available housing had been steered to the wrong side of an invisible line. That same evening, in her office, Catherine opened a binder her attorney had prepared summarizing DOJ inquiry risk exposure. She read it once, quickly, the way you read something you already know will be bad. Then she turned to the last page, which listed projected plaintiff counts. What the number at the bottom, 340 to 410, landed differently than revenue projections and acquisition costs. She turned past it, turned back. In the margin of the page, almost without deciding to, she wrote a single word and immediately felt the inadequacy of it. She closed the binder, opened the bottom drawer, looked at her father's signature on the 1994 memo. She had not created this. She had also not stopped it. The distance between those two facts had always felt like enough room to stand, as it was beginning to feel smaller. Marcus was walking out of the federal courthouse on a Friday afternoon when his phone rang from a number he didn't recognize. He answered. The voice on the other end was unhurried, which was its own kind of threat. Judge Cole, we know what you're building. We also know your daughter attends Franklin Elementary. You should think carefully about your career before this goes further. He stopped walking. The rain came down in its usual patient way, indifferent to what was happening beneath it. He stood on the courthouse steps and put one hand flat against the stone wall beside him. He closed his eyes. 3 seconds. 4. The part of him that was a father existed for those 4 seconds without the part of him that was a judge, and it was the longest 4 seconds of the investigation. Then he opened his eyes and called Rosa. They know about Maya. We move in 2 weeks, not 3. Marcus! I'm not stopping. I'm accelerating. He was already walking. Get Dorothy Chen's routing slip authenticated by end of week. I want the algorithm documentation indexed by Friday. And I need you to call the DOJ contact and tell them we're ready to schedule. He called his neighbor Willa that evening. Retired teacher, steady, the kind of person who asked one question and meant it, and arranged for her to collect Maya from school each day until further notice. He didn't explain why. Willa asked, "Are you all right?" He took 2 seconds before answering, which was itself an answer. "I will be." The night before the hearing, Marcus sat on the sofa with Maya in the particular quiet of a house that had made its peace with itself. She leaned against his arm and didn't ask for explanations. She had learned, the way children learn things that aren't taught, when talking added to a moment and when it didn't. After a while, "Bah, why, are you scared?" He thought about the honest answer before giving it. "A little, yes." Was Mama ever scared? All the time. She did things anyway. Maya nodded slowly. "Then you already know how." She got up, kissed him once on the cheek in the abrupt way she had, and went to bed without ceremony. He sat in the quiet she left behind. On the wall, her drawing. 3 figures in a green field. A sun with 14 rays. For a long time. Rosa arrived at 9. Let for a long time. Rosa arrived at 9, let herself in with the key he'd given her 2 weeks prior, and sat in the front room without being asked. She didn't knock on his study door. She made tea, left a mug outside it, and opened her laptop. He saw the light under the door when he came out for water at midnight. Neither of them said anything, when it was enough that she was there. His phone lit up at 11:58 with a number he recognized this time, Catherine Harrington. He stared at it through 2 full rings. He picked up. Her voice was level, nothing performed about it, no softness manufactured for the occasion. "Judge Cole, I'd like to speak before tomorrow. No attorneys. I think you should hear what I have to say." He looked toward the front room where Rosa's lamp was still on. He looked at the mug she'd left. As he looked at the drawing on the wall. "You have 1 hour, he said. "Tomorrow morning, my office, 7 a.m. Tomorrow, everything would change. He had known that for weeks. What he hadn't known, what none of the evidence, the timelines, the algorithm documentation had prepared him for, was that the person waiting on the other end of the phone was also, in her own incomplete and overdue way, ready. Catherine Harrington arrived at 7 a.m. with no attorney, no assistant, and a yellow folder Marcus recognized before she set it on his desk. Her father's documents. She had carried them out of the building herself. She sat down across from him and did not arrange her expression into anything other than what it was. "I didn't build the algorithm," she began. "I inherited the company in 2017, and the system was already running. I knew it existed. I understood what it did. I told myself the revenue it protected was legitimate, even if the mechanism wasn't. And I kept telling myself that for 6 years, because it was easier than the alternative." She paused. "That's not a defense. I want to be precise about that. I'm not here to offer you a defense." Marcus looked at the folder, then at her. "Then what are you here for?" I want to know if there's a path where 410 families receive actual compensation, not a settlement number that looks large in a press release and arrives in checks that don't cover what was lost. I can make that happen from inside the company faster than a federal judgment can compel it, but only if I'm still inside the company. He was quiet for long enough that the silence became its own kind of answer. When he spoke, his voice carried none of the satisfaction that a lesser version of himself might have permitted. You'll provide full cooperation to the DOJ, every internal document, every algorithm modification record, everything in that folder, and everything beneath it. Yes, you will not direct your legal team to delay, fragment, or obscure. You will appear before the Oversight Commission this morning, and you will tell the truth in front of the people your company harmed. He leaned forward slightly. I can't offer you anything in return. I have no authority to negotiate your exposure, and I wouldn't use it if I did. What I can tell you is that how you conduct yourself from this morning forward is the only thing that will ever matter more than what you did before it. Catherine looked at him for a long moment. Something moved across her face that was not quite relief and not quite grief, but lived in the territory between them, where people go when they've finally stopped running from something. She picked up the yellow folder and placed it on his side of the desk. Then let's go. The conference room on the 34th floor held the same 12 people it had held 9 months earlier, plus 4 DOJ representatives, 2 federal marshals positioned near the door, and Rosa Mendez seated along the far wall with a recorder and a notepad, and the expression of someone who had spent 7 years waiting for a room exactly like this one. Marcus stood where he had stood in January, the same pale blue uniform, the same unhurried posture, the mop bucket absent this time. He opened his laptop. The screen behind him populated with a geospatial map. Seattle, then Oregon, then California, then Nevada. 4 states resolving into a single visible pattern of coordinated exclusion. He walked the room through it without theater, without triumph, in the measured cadence of someone presenting evidence whose weight needed no amplification. Rejection rates, algorithm modification dates, the routing slip from Dorothy Chen's file, or the internal email from March 2018 with its 4 embedded words. Thomas Okafor's protocol documentation. The voice pattern assessment system introduced in 2020. 14 affiliate companies, 8 years. Between 340 and 410 families. One of the 12 reached for his phone. Marcus looked at him. That's your right. Ms. Harrington has already contacted the Department of Justice and agreed to full cooperation. Honey, which means what you're looking at is the complete evidentiary record, and your attorney cannot change what's in it. The room turned toward Catherine. She was seated at the head of the table where she had stood with her acquisition projections 9 months ago, and she did not look away from the screen. Everything Judge Cole has presented is accurate, she said. I am prepared to provide full access to all company records and to testify to the Commission regarding the origin and continuation of these practices. That includes documents predating my tenure. She placed one hand flat on the table, not for emphasis, but the way a person places a hand on something when they are steadying themselves for what comes next. This should have stopped before I inherited it. It should have stopped the day I understood what it was. I am the reason it didn't stop. I intend to spend whatever time I have left in this role, making that mean something correctable. The federal marshals made 3 arrests in the building before noon. Two senior directors who had administered the algorithm's quarterly modifications, and Harrington's general counsel, who had reviewed and approved each adjustment with full knowledge of its purpose. Catherine was not among them. She was already on the phone with the company's chief financial officer, authorizing the creation of a dedicated remediation fund seeded with $47 million before the DOJ had finished processing the morning's paperwork. What followed moved the way justice moves when it has been properly prepared. Not slowly, not dramatically, but with the unstoppable momentum of a thing that has already happened and is only now becoming visible to everyone else. Dorothy Chen received a call from Rosa that afternoon and sat down at her kitchen table and looked at the shoebox she had carried from 3 apartments over 7 years, and she did not cry. She nodded once, firmly, the way you acknowledge something you always knew was true but needed the world to confirm. Thomas Okafor's name was formally cleared within 48 hours. His NDA voided by federal order. James Whitfield, the professor with the manila folder and the straight shoulders, was contacted by a DOJ caseworker and asked if he would be willing to serve as a named plaintiff in the class action that would represent all 410 families. He said yes before the caseworker finished the sentence. Rosa testified before a Senate subcommittee in Washington, D.C. 3 months later, presenting the geospatial analysis methodology as a framework for identifying algorithmic housing discrimination across any metropolitan market. The analysis became the foundation of a proposed federal transparency requirement that would compel property companies above a certain revenue threshold to submit their applicant scoring systems for independent audit. It did not pass in the first session. It was reintroduced in the next, and the families it would eventually protect did not yet know their names were already being argued over in rooms they'd never been invited into. 11 months after the morning in the conference room, on a Saturday in November, this kitchen in Marcus Cole's apartment smelled of coffee and the specific kind of burnt that happens at the edges of pancakes when the cook refuses all assistance. Maya stood at the stove in her pajamas, turning in slow circles while she waited for the next batch, or a habit she had when she was happy and not paying attention to herself. Rosa sat at the counter with her laptop, annotating the testimony she'd been asked to deliver at a state housing commission hearing the following Tuesday. She had a key. She had left a toothbrush. Neither of these things had been formally announced. They had simply become true over the course of enough mornings that began this way. Marcus was at the sink rinsing the mixing bowl when Maya produced a folded piece of paper from her pajama pocket with the solemnity of someone presenting an official document. She set it on the counter in front of Rosa. It was a drawing, 3 figures in a field of aggressively green crayon, a sun with 14 rays bleeding yellow into orange at the edges, and at the bottom, in the careful block letters of someone who had practiced, "Our family. We are enough." So Rosa looked at the drawing for a long time. She looked at Maya, who was already back at the stove monitoring the pancakes with scientific attention. She looked at Marcus, who was watching from the sink with the expression of a man who had learned, at some cost, the difference between protecting people and trusting them with the truth of what you feel. He had spent 9 months in a uniform that made him invisible so he could see clearly. And he had sat with $62 and a map full of red markers and the knowledge that the only thing worse than the scale of an injustice is deciding it's too large to address. He had put one hand on a courthouse wall and counted to 4 and then kept going. None of it had been without cost. All of it had been worth it, not because it changed what could not be changed, but because it changed what could. The pancakes began to smell of burning at the edges. Nobody moved to save them. Maya announced, without turning around, that this was intentional because the crispy part was the best part, and anyone who disagreed was wrong. Rosa closed her laptop. Marcus dried his hands. Outside, the rain came down the way it always did in November. Patient, persistent, settling over the city without announcement. The morning light came through the window low and gold, the way it does in the last weeks of the year when the days are short and everything that still holds warmth holds it more deliberately. But the kitchen was warm. It was enough. It was, in the precise and unimprovable way of things that are simply true, more than enough.